Set me ablaze, set me ablaze. Love that, church. Thank you, Andrea, for introducing us to that new song. That was great. We love it, love it. So that's where we're heading this morning. If you've been here the last few weeks, we've been making our way through this short New Testament book called Philippians, and we come to chapter 3. And our theme has been shine like stars. This morning, I want to take that theme, shine like stars, next level. Today, I want to talk about blazing, just like Hugh's saying. Kind of blaze kind of like this. A few years ago, we had a fall fest out here on our field, and we were planning like a chili cook-off. We had a hay ride. We asked Josh to sing some country music songs. He's from Texas, he can do that. And then we asked some high schoolers to light a bonfire. That was a mistake, because I didn't know they would get in some pickups and go around to construction sites and pick up used pallets. They brought back like 30 or 40 of them, piled them in the field back here, lit them on fire. When I arrived that night, I pulled up here, and over the top of our 30-foot high gym, I could see the flames. I'm not kidding you. It was there to roast like marshmallows with and things, but parents had pulled their children back. They're afraid their lawn chairs were gonna melt. I mean, it was this huge fire that wouldn't go out. Someone called the fire department. That's how big the flame was. But here's the thing, it didn't go well that night, but the neighbors knew that at the Grove, we were blazing. It was blazing Jesus Christ here. So that's what Paul is called. That's the kind of life he's inviting us to. Open up to Philippians 3. I want to start reading in verse 8. We read, I consider, he writes, everything a loss because of the surpassing worth of knowing Christ Jesus my Lord. He said, he's more important than anything else in my life. Verse 12, move down. I press on to take hold of that which Christ Jesus took hold of me. Brothers and sisters, I do not consider myself yet to have taken hold of it, but one thing I do, forgetting what is behind me, I strain toward what is ahead. I press on toward the goal to win the prize for which God has called me heavenward in Christ Jesus. What is Paul saying here? He's saying that nothing in life is more important than pursuing Jesus Christ. He's saying that the most important thing in my life is Jesus Christ. So I wrote down this short key idea. I hope it sticks with you today, maybe for years, and it's this. Make Jesus Christ the blazing center of your life. Make Jesus Christ the blazing center of your life. As people get to know you, do they see that Jesus Christ is the blazing center of your life? When you go to work, does everyone know that Jesus Christ is the blazing center of your life? In your neighborhood, on your street, in your college dorm, in your apartment complex, when people see you, do they know that Jesus Christ is the blazing center of your life? Among your friends, is Jesus Christ the blazing center of your friendships? How about your acts of mercy and justice and compassion? Is Jesus Christ blazing through your passion for justice and mercy? That's what we want to look at today. That's the challenge that Paul gives us. Paul says the most interesting thing, if you look back at verse 13, he says, there's one thing that I do. The most important thing, the one thing that I do is to pursue Christ. It's to make Christ the most important thing in my life. The problem is, I think there's a lot of people that go to church that Jesus Christ is not the blazing center of anything. He's more like a flicker, more like a Bic lighter here. And it doesn't even usually light. You know, it's like on 4th of July, you have all your friends over, you throw some hamburger meat on. These things, they don't work. Look, it just clicks. There, finally, some people's lives are like that. We think they're a follower of Christ. We think there's a flicker once in a while. It doesn't last long, but Jesus Christ certainly isn't the blazing center of their life. In Matthew chapter 5, in Jesus' first sermon, he said this. He said, let your light shine so bright in front of all people that no one can hide you. Everyone can see your light. He says, whatever you do, don't put a bucket over your light. I think there are a lot of Christians, or at least people who go to church, that almost intentionally don't make Christ the blazing center of their lives. They're afraid that their neighbors will think they're strange or their coworkers will think they're fanatics. Paul says this, though, in Romans chapter 1, verse 16. He says, I am not ashamed of the good news of Jesus Christ because Christ is blazing through his life. When I was in college, there was a band that was traveling around selling a lot of CDs, and they played on our college campus, and they were pretty good, but the name of the band was Undercover. In other words, hey, you can be a Christian, follow God, but kind of keep it undercover, on the DL. Let's not get too crazy about this whole following Jesus Christ thing. But Paul says, no, make Jesus Christ the blazing center of your life. When you start to read about the church in Philippi was this busy cosmopolitan. It was a crossroads of trade. For example, we read that Lydia was a trader in purple cloth, all right? Not green or red or any, just purple. She liked purple. But we read also that there was like amphitheaters in Philippi. There's a lot of things pulling people's attention away from Christ. There were gold mines in Philippi. And it's the same today. There is so much competing for our attention that Jesus Christ doesn't end up the most important thing. He can easily end up the last thing that matters in our life. The challenge today is to make Jesus Christ the blazing center of it all. So how do we do that? That's where I want to head this morning. How do we make Jesus Christ the center of our lives? I want to say this first, and it comes from chapter 3. He says, leave the past behind. So go back to verse 13, we read this. The one thing I do, however, is to forget what is behind me and do my best to reach for what is ahead. So Paul takes a look backwards before he talks about what's in front of us. He says, I have left everything behind. It doesn't matter. For example, Paul is a respected Roman citizen. He's a theologian. He's a religious leader. He says this. He says, but none of that matters anymore. In fact, look down at verse 8. This is from the Message Bible. It reads like this. All things I once thought were so important are gone from my life. I've dumped them all in the trash so that I could embrace Christ and be embraced by him. He's saying everything from my past I've left behind. Paul also had a dark past, a checkered past. Paul, as you know, was a persecutor of Christians. And he says this in verse 6. He says, there are things I'm not proud of anymore. I did it, but that's behind me. When you think about your life, are there things from your past that are keeping you from making Jesus Christ the blazing center of your life? Are there things from your past that you're still holding on to, the wrong kind of things? Maybe there's a person from your past you're holding on to. Or maybe there's an addiction or a habit. Or maybe you did something that you're so ashamed of. You hope no one will ever find out. You hope that God can forgive you, but you don't think he can. Paul says, all of that is left in the past. When you think about your life, what are the things that are keeping you from moving forward with Christ and making him the center of your life? Maybe there was some pain in your life and you lost someone who you loved a lot, and every day you keep asking God, why? That's in your past, Paul says. It's time to move on. Maybe there was abuse in your past. That's in your past. It doesn't mean that's who you are today. Maybe there's regret. Maybe somebody broke your heart when they left you. Paul says that's in the past. Maybe you wish you had made a different decision or handled something differently. You keep thinking, if only I had done this, or only if I had not done that. Paul says that's behind you. That's in your past. Leave it behind. You can be free of that now. Until you leave it in your past, you can never be that brand new person God made you to be, and you can certainly never make Jesus Christ a blazing center of your life today and for the future. When I say that, I think about a young college student who used to babysit for us. She was a good friend of Veronica's, and this was when we were working at a church in California. But then I moved to Wheaton as a college pastor. And Veronica would still talk to her on the phone, and after she graduated, she started to see a guy, and then she would call Veronica crying and saying, this guy, he keeps breaking my heart. He says he loves me, but then he does things. And finally Veronica says, why don't you just leave him? And then the calls get worse. She says, he's so abusive now, emotionally and physically. And Veronica's saying, just leave him. And she'll say, well, I do. And then he shows up and I think I like him. He promises to change, but he doesn't. This goes on for months. Finally, I get on the phone with Veronica. I said, you need to leave him. He's a dirtbag. You know, you don't need this kind of person. Finally, after months of this, Veronica says, why don't you move out here? She says, well, it's so far away. But she didn't love her job anyway. So Veronica talked her into packing her car, driving 2,500 miles from LA to Chicago. And right away, somehow she landed a job at VeggieTales. If you're going through hard times, you need to work at a place like VeggieTales, all right? Where they make you laugh and draw cartoons. And she's working at VeggieTales. And then she started to go to a church and she meets this young youth pastor and they fall in love and they get married and they have 2 kids. What's my point? None of that would have happened if she doesn't leave her past behind. Now, you don't have to drive 2,500 miles. But my point is, has happened in your life yesterday does not define who you are today. God has this brand new future waiting for you. Paul goes on to say this. He says, this is verse 13. He says, I am forgetting what is behind me. I want to read from Hebrews before we move on to the next thought. This is Hebrews chapter 12. He says, let us strip off every weight that slows us down, especially the sin that so easily trips us up, and let us run with endurance the race that God has set before us. And so what from your past is it time to leave behind? What from your past needs to be thrown off so that you can run this race well? Paul loves these running analogies. All right, and that takes us to our next one. The next challenge that I have for you, if we are going to make Christ the blazing center of our lives, is to pursue your divine given calling. I think that every person who says they're a follower of Jesus Christ, you have a divine calling on your life. Maybe you've sensed it, maybe you've thought so. I just want to say, yes, you do. Look at verse 13 with me. We read this. He says, one thing that I do, he says, I forget what is behind me. And now, instead of looking at the past, he looks to the future and he says, I do my best to reach for what is ahead. Paul says God has this great future waiting for you. You have a calling. Look down at verse 14. He uses this word here. He says this, I press on to the goal to win the prize for which God has called me heavenward in Christ Jesus. I want to take a minute just to talk about this word, called. Paul is saying he has this divine, heaven-pointed calling on his life, and so do you. I think in our culture, we don't talk much about calling, do we? If you were to say to people at work, hey, let me tell you about my calling, they would look at you side-eyed, like something happened last night. Anyway, but we talk more about careers. Now, don't get me wrong. Careers are many times part of your calling. Yes, God uses our careers as part of our calling, but a calling is much different than a career. A calling is something that you do for and you do it with God. Careers come and they go. In fact, in our society today, some are saying that work has become the religion of our day, that work has become the altar that we sacrifice our time, our families, our best passions and abilities, we give it all to work. Your work alone will never satisfy you. Well, work, if it's part of your calling, yes, it's great. But careers end, don't they? Every person gets the tap on the shoulder and they say, your fastball's not fast enough anymore. We don't even need you in the minors. You can be an engineer, you can be a teacher. That tap on the shoulder comes to everybody. You don't have the good stuff anymore. It's time to go home. Everybody gets that. It's called retirement. There's nothing wrong with that. Retirement's awesome. You have a lot of free time. You end up with a lot of cool toys and very clean garages. All right, retired guys have the cleanest garages I've ever seen. I respect those guys for that. But here's the thing, with a calling, your divine calling is with you until the day you leave planet Earth. But I think there's a lot of people that casually go through life not thinking they have anything important they have to do for God. But Paul says this is 1 Corinthians 9:26, I run with purpose every step, So what is your calling? What is it that God wants you to do with your life? At the Grove, we talk about living on mission. You are put here to live on mission. What is it? Sometimes we say, well, we're going to decide what our calling is. I think maybe it's something that we discover. You make yourself available to serve God, and you'll discover your calling. You'll know. It's where your passions and your abilities come together. I know for me, I thought I could decide what I was going to do for my life, but God had different plans. When I started college in California, I declared myself as a business major. I decided, I'd been raised as a son of poor missionaries. I decided when I went to college, by the time I was 30, I was gonna have $1 million. By the time I was 25, I was gonna own a convertible BMW and cruise down PCH wearing my members only jacket at sunset. That was my plan. That was my life plan right there in a sentence. But by my junior year, a friend of mine had asked me to start volunteering with his junior high ministry. He's in student ministries. And then that summer, Brett said, hey, Palmer, I want you to be my intern. And I said, intern, what's that mean? He says, well, first of all, it's paid. I was like, well, how much? He said, $50 a month. It literally was $50 a month. I said, okay, I'm in. I needed some money. That wasn't much, but at least it was something. And the word intern sounded very important to me. And so I started helping him out. And that summer, he started swimming studies in people's homes and Bible studies for the junior hires. And after 2 weeks, right away, he said, all right, Palmer, you're teaching next week. I was like, what? I never taught anything in my life. And then he gives me my text, and he gives me Revelation chapter 6. I remember it like it was yesterday. I don't know why he was teaching through the book of Revelation to junior hires, but Brett was. And so I studied like crazy. Can I tell you what Revelation chapter 6 is about? It's about the 7 seals and the 4th horseman of death. I'm not making this up. And I don't think I've taught on it since. You're welcome to. When's the last time you read Revelation 6? Anyway, so I sit down with the junior hires, after they've been playing water polo, and I'm trying to teach them Revelation chapter 6 about the 4th horseman of death. But I had studied, and I think they paid attention. I scared them or something. But that summer, I realized something, that I connected with junior hires. Maybe it was the immaturity in me. But I realized I loved doing this. I wasn't so excited about the business major. So when I went back to school in the fall, I changed my major from business to Bible. And that's how I ended up here right now. I kind of fell into it backwards. I think God callings have a way of discovering us. But you have to say, God, here's my life. Here's my passions. They're yours. And when you start to serve, I think he starts to show you what he wants to do next. I have on the screen a short list of ways that I think we can all start to discover our calling. I have first, your calling starts where you are, not where you think you should be. Next, I have your calling will use your strengths. Do you know that all of us have what some call signature strengths? There are some things that you do better than anybody else. Moses, if you remember this, God says, hey, I want you to lead a people out of slavery. And Moses says, oh, I can't, I'm no good at that. I can't even give a speech. And so God says, Moses, what are you holding in your hand? And Moses is not holding a Bic lighter. Moses is holding a staff. And he says, I'm holding a staff. He said, all right, Moses, you're good at leading sheep. Now you're going to use that staff to lead people. What do you think of that? I think all of us hold something in our hand, and maybe you've been withholding it from God. If you're going to find your calling, start letting God use your best abilities and gifts. Finally, I have your calling is not most about you. It's about Christ. It's about what Christ wants to do with your life and in your life. All right, so Paul takes a look backwards first in Philippians 3. He talks about our past. He says, leave it. And then he says, go towards your divine, God-given future, your calling. And then he starts to talk about the present. Verse 14, he says this. He says, press on toward the goal to win the prize for which God has called me. So I just want to pause on this phrase here, press on. I think for all of us, God is saying, press on. I don't know where you are in your relationship with Jesus Christ. Maybe you want to give up on God today. I want to say, press on. Maybe you have felt like you have found your calling, but you want to give up because it's gotten hard. You say, nobody's helping me. At first I was excited about it, but now it's just a pain in the neck. I want to say, press on. God is going to do it. He's growing something in you. Paul says, if you feel like quitting, press on. I think Paul keeps using these race analogies. Anyone who has run a race, you want to give up, don't you? At some point, especially if it's a race of any length, you want to quit. I've run a marathon once. Really, the person that should be giving this sermon in Philippians 3 is Scott Swanson on our staff. Scott is a runner. Scott can run like a deer. All right, he runs like before breakfast, he'll run 8 miles. I'm not making this up, and hardly sweat. He and his wife just ran a marathon. Scott, I think, could run from here to Tucson without stopping. That's Scott. Maybe. But I ran a marathon once. I think I used to be an athlete, but I'm certainly not a runner. But when I was in high school, my junior year, for the junior prom, our fundraiser at our high school was always a marathon. Everyone would sign up and get pledges, and that's how the prom was paid for. So my junior year, I signed up. I didn't think I could run very well, but I made it 26.2 miles. It was far, and my feet were killing me. I walked part of it. It must have taken me 6 or 7 hours. But here's the best part. When we got to the finish line, our school had the best tradition ever. At the finish line, it was a party. There was a big, giant pool party. There was a barbecue. Someone was barbecuing burgers and chicken, and then they were pumping music through the speakers like Rufus and Shaka Khan, Kool and the Gang. You know, you name it. It was Bee Gees. We were staying alive. What was happening there. And then it got even better. When it got dark, the pool party turned into a dance. Now, my feet were hurting, so I was terrible at dancing that night. Plus, I was Presbyterian, and Presbyterians don't dance at all. But it was the best night. Then it got better. They had us throw sleeping bags and pickups at the starting line, and it turned into, you could stay there the whole night. It was an all-nighter. One of the best nights in high school. Well, that was my junior year. My senior year, I was older and wiser, and so the race started. And I took off running, me and a buddy of mine. And I was in pretty good shape. I'd been playing a lot of soccer. And at the 5-mile mark, we're in first place. But then we hit like mile 8, mile 9. And I turn and I go, man, there's a big party tonight. And we're going to be so tired. We need to take it easy. He goes, you're right. And so, isn't church a place for confession? So can we just make this a place of So we started to hitchhike. And we started to jump in the back of pickup truck. It's terrible and shameful, isn't it? It actually happened. And then when we would see one of the checkpoints where you sign in, we would jump out of the pickup and sign in. We're like world record pace at this point. And then our principal is at one of the checkpoints, sees us jump out of the back of the pickup, and he gives us DNFs. You know what that means? Did not finish. DQ, disqualified. And so we shamefully made it to the finish line. But we got there like 10:30 in the morning. Everyone else was about 3 or 4 hours behind us. Do you know what happens when you get to the finish line and nobody is set up yet? There's no party. It's just the two of us. We're sitting going, what just happened? You know, I was picturing this giant party, but there's no barbecue, there's no music, no Rufus and Shaka Khan, none of that is happening. And it was the most disappointing night. They're giving out trophies that night. You know whose name didn't get called? Palmer Chinchen. People would ask me, hey, what was your time? Oh, DNF, did not finish. You know, it's just shameful. And life is like that. I think many times we're tempted to quit on God. We're tempted to quit on our calling. And Paul says, bear down, buckle down. Verse 14, he says, I have my eye on the goal. I'm running and I'm not turning back. Stay the course. Can I just say, everybody, if you are tempted to quit on anything right now, don't do it. Maybe you want to quit on your job. Stick with it. Find joy there. It's there. Maybe you want to quit on a friendship. Give them another chance. Maybe you want to quit on your marriage. God is the best at healing marriages. Show them more love. Stick with it. Press on. Press on. Maybe even you showed up today and you're ready to give up on God. Can I say press on? I want to end with this final thought from Philippians chapter 3, and it's this: finish strong. Paul keeps saying, I'm pressing on to the goal. He says this over and over in verse 14. But turn to 1 Corinthians, turn back a few pages with me to chapter 9, and we read this. Do you not know that in a race all the runners run, but only one gets the prize? Run in such a way as to get the prize. Finish strong. Don't quit. Don't give up. This morning, the challenge has been to make Jesus Christ the blazing center of your life. And I'll end where we started. When people meet you, when people talk to you, whether it's at work or in your neighborhood or on your college campus or on your high school campus, are they seeing that Jesus Christ is the most important thing in your life? Does everyone know that? Everyone should. Is Jesus Christ the blazing center of your life? If you move down to verse 20 in chapter 3, Paul ends with the most fascinating thought. He says, but there's far more to life for us. We're citizens of high heaven, where Jesus Christ will transform our earthly bodies into glorious bodies like his own. He'll make us beautiful and whole. Do you see what he's saying? No matter what shame is in your past, no matter how badly you've been hurt or abused by a person or a situation, that God will make it whole. You make him the blazing center of your life, and he will make you whole. I say finish strong because I think here on earth, I think God has given us glimpses, snapshots of heaven. I think we get bits and pieces of heaven all the time. We miss them sometimes. But I'll give you some of my favorite examples. I think sunsets and beaches are a bit of heaven. I think chubby little babies are a bit of heaven. You know, you hold one of those guys, that's a bit of heaven. I think music like we sang today are a bit of heaven. I think marriage or friendships is a bit of heaven. I think Krispy Kreme donuts are a bit of heaven. You know, think God gives us a taste of that. But I think finish lines are my favorite glimpse of heaven that we get on earth. I say that because I was at a finish line in Tempe a few years ago. My buddy Tom was in town, and Tom's a triathlete. He runs like Olympic distance triathlons. And he says, hey, the Ironman is today in Tempe. He says, let's head up there to the finish line. And I said, but it's 8 o'clock at night. I said, the thing started this morning while we're in church. And he goes, yeah, he says, they're still running. I said, you sure? So we drove up there. And we're parking. And first of all, I don't know if you know much about the Ironman, but in an Ironman, first you swim 2.4 miles. You know this? Then you bike 112 miles. And then you run 26.2 miles, a complete marathon. So we get up there and it's 8:45 and we park the car and we're walking toward the finish line and I hear the announcer over the loudspeaker. At first, I'm not sure what he's saying. And then I realize this. He's calling out the name of every person who crosses the finish line, name after name. And as we're getting closer, I can hear him, and he's saying, everyone, this is Tim Williams coming down the chute. Tim is an engineer in Chandler. And then as Tim crosses the finish line, he goes, Tim, you're an Ironman. You did it. And then he would go next to the next person. Hey, everyone, this is Cindy Smith. She's a 6th grade school teacher in Mesa. She's coming down the chute. Then she crosses the finish line. He said, Cindy Smith, you did it. Cindy, you are an Ironman. Yeah, he called the women Ironmans too. And everybody's an Ironman. And then he stopped and he said, it's 9 o'clock. He said, this is a special hour in the Ironman competitions. Around the world, we pause at 9 o'clock. Because at 9 o'clock, everyone who's been running this race has been running for 14 hours. Everyone who finishes now, they never thought they were gonna make it to the finish line, but they are. So he says, I want you to cheer louder now. And we're gonna cheer and we're gonna play. He said, we play this same song around the world, U2's Where Streets Have No Names. And he hits play on that. And now the crowd got really loud. And I looked, and just then, my buddy Tom, he looks at me, he goes, look at the guy coming down the chute. I go, yeah. He says, he doesn't have any legs. I go, what do you mean? Because the guy's gait looked perfect. He says he's a double amputee. I said, no way, because there was a barrier with banners on it. He says, look. So I leaned over. The guy has 2 running blades. He's been going for 14 hours on running blades. But his gait is perfect. His stride is perfect. It's just like Paul says about heaven. No matter what's happened in your past, when you get to heaven, you will be made complete, beautiful, whole. We read this in the Bible. Read in Luke chapter 5. That God says that when you get to heaven, the angels will cheer. That's what we read. Paul even says this. This is in 2 Timothy. He says, all that's left now is the shouting and God's applause. Matthew 25, Jesus says that God is waiting in heaven, that when you get there, he's going to say, well done, bravo. You know, you don't think you can shine. You don't think you can blaze for Christ. You can. And when you get to heaven, God and the angels are waiting for you. And they're going to be standing there like the announcer of the Ironman competition. They're going to be calling out your name. They're going to say, Sophia, you didn't think you could make it. You didn't think you could do it. But Sophia, you are a godly woman. And then the angels will cheer. They'll say, Logan, you made it. You didn't think you were going to get here, but you did, Logan. Congratulations. You are a godly man. And the angels will cheer. And God will applaud. And he'll say, well done, well done.